Hi, welcome to Tammy's Kitchen. I'm Tammy Gibson and we're back cooking today and company's coming, so we're going to make a supper that's fit for guests. So as you can see from the decor, the holiday season is upon us, so this won't be a traditional Thanksgiving meal, but it would be maybe an alternative that you could prepare if you're just having a small group for your get-together. So today we're going to start with a recipe that was my mom's, and it's just a white bread recipe. It's really simple and it doesn't take much time, so you could get this prepared for your guests and it'll be hot and piping from the oven when they arrive. So let's get cooking. Got my bowl here, and this calls for 1 package of yeast, and I do use the rapid rise yeast. And I've got in this dish 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 tablespoon of sugar. And to that I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of warm water. And we're just going to stir this until it dissolves a bit. Alright, now we're going to add 1/4 cup of sugar, 3 tablespoons of vegetable oil, three cups of flour, and then we're going to add 1 1/4 cups of additional warm water. And I'm going to get that from the sink, and you can just run hot water out of the sink. You don't have to heat it on the stove or anything. I didn't get that in advance because I wanted it to be good and warm whenever it went in this bowl, so bear with me. I'm going to grab that out of the sink. Okay, so 1 1/4 cups of warm water. The water out of my sink does get pretty warm, so just be sure that it's pretty much hot whenever you pour it in there. It will be best and get your yeast activated. So just stir that up with your spoon. Just be sure that you get all your flour and sugar incorporated in there. Okay, so we have all of that incorporated, and as you can see, I've got my mixer standing by here. The original instructions say to add 1 more cup of flour and put on a floured board to work it in. Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit. They didn't probably have these handy dandy mixers whenever this recipe was invented. I'm going to add the additional cup of flour, and I've got my dough hook on my mixer, and I'm going to let the mixer work it in. This works great, and I don't have to get out the whole board thing and flour it and make the big mess on the counter that you have to if you're going to knead it by hand. But certainly if you don't have a mixer or don't want to use it, you know, the old-fashioned method works fine too. That only took about a minute to mix that, you know, extra cup of flour in, and I'm just going to rake this off our dough hook, and it's ready to start the rising process. Just cover this with a clean dish towel and set it in a warm place for about an hour until the dough doubles in size. And we'll let that rest and start the rising process, and we'll get on with our next dish. We're going to start our second recipe of the day. So we've had the beginning, now we're going to skip to the end. We're going to make a turtle pumpkin praline pie. And to start with, I have about 40 vanilla wafers in my food processor, and I'm just going to pulse them until they're real finely crushed to make the crust for our pie. Hold your ears, this will be a little noisy. Okay, we'll call that good. You can do that by hand with your rolling pin if you want to, but that's just a huge pain to me, so break out the old food processor and it'll chop them up for you. Okay, to that we're going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar and 1/4 of a cup of melted butter. Okay, I've got a 9-inch pie plate here. I'm just going to dump that in. Then we just want to evenly press that onto the bottom and up the sides of our pie plate. And what I think works really great for that is a measuring cup. Oh, there was a little cookie that didn't get quite mixed up. I'll take care of that. Okay, now we've got our crust in there. Now, over the top of our crust, I'm going to pour over it 1/4 of a cup of caramel ice cream topping. And then I'm just going to take my spoon and try to spread it out as best I can. Okay, and over the top of that, 1/2 cup of pecans. Okay, we've got our crust in there. That looks pretty yummy right the way it is. We're back to make the filling for our praline pumpkin pie, and in my dish I have 2 packages of instant vanilla pudding. And to that, I'm going to add 1 cup of milk. And we're just going to whisk that together until that starts to thicken up and until it's fully dissolved. And you know, 1 cup of milk and 2 packages of pudding, and it isn't going to take it very long to thicken up. And we'll stir this quite a bit just to be sure that the pudding mix gets dissolved before we add our other ingredients. So that looks good to me. So to that we're going to add a cup of pumpkin, and that is just canned pumpkin, you know, right out of the store, right off the shelf. And I've got a teaspoon of cinnamon and 1/4 of a teaspoon of nutmeg. It might have actually been a little less than 1/4. That nutmeg is very strong spice, so I was not very liberal with it because it can overpower the taste of your dish. That's getting so thick I can hardly stir it. It smells really good. Okay, and lastly, we're going to add 1.5 cups of Cool Whip. Okay, and we'll fold that in. My arm may fall off before I get this pie mixed up here. We need to do some workouts. This will be just a little bit of a different twist on your traditional pumpkin pie. It sure smells delicious though, so I'm hoping this turns out good. Okay, now let's just pour that into our crust. For those of you who maybe think you don't care for pumpkin all that much, this might be a nice alternative for you because the pumpkin won't be the primary thing that you taste. You know, with the pudding and the Cool Whip in there, it's really gonna take some of the sharpness out of that pumpkin. And you've got the cinnamon and the nutmeg in there to just spice it up a little bit. So you might give this a try even if you think you don't like pumpkin pie. Okay, now this is going to go in the fridge for an hour or so, getting a little tongue-tied there. And then we're going to garnish the top with some more Cool Whip and caramel and whipped cream. So we'll be back to check on that after a while. Okay, we've got bread going, we've got dessert going. Now it's time to start on the main course. For the main course today, we're going to make a chicken Kiev, and we're going to start by making the filling. So I have 1/4 cup of butter that's been brought to room temperature so that it's soft. And to that, I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of chives. These are fresh chives, and you can get those just in the produce section of the grocery store. And I must say, they are very fragrant. So these are going to add lots of flavor to our dish. And then I'm going to mince a clove of garlic. So we're just going to work that all together. Okay, now I'm going to spread this out on a piece of, I just have a piece of wax paper here on this plate. You're supposed to form this into a 3 by 2 inch rectangle. So I'm not sure how exact we're going to be able to get that, but we'll do the best we can. I don't want to let any of that butter go to waste, so get this scraped out good here. Okay, so we just have a little square of butter here, and this is going to go in the freezer for 30 minutes until it sets up so that we can put that in the middle of our chicken breast. Okay, now it's time to get back to our bread. It's been about an hour or so, and as you can see, the bread has doubled in size and it's raised up nicely in our bowl. So on the counter here, I've just taped some wax paper down and floured it a little bit. Mostly because I despise washing the pastry board thing that, you know, I roll out cinnamon rolls or something on. I hate washing that thing. So when I make this little bread recipe, I just always tape some wax paper down, and that way I can just throw that in the trash and I'm done. So just dump your dough out on your floured wax paper, and then we're just going to divide it in half. And there's no exact method to this, and I usually don't get it exactly even, so one loaf may be a little bit bigger than the other one, but you know, you can eyeball it and get fairly close. So I've sprayed my pan with some cooking spray. So we're just gonna kind of form that into a little loaf and plop it in the pan. And I usually just kind of mash it down here so that it fills up the pan. And this will make 2 medium-sized loaves or 1 really large loaf. I will tell you, if you make this into 1 really large loaf, it's awfully hard to get done. So I found that this works better. So got those in our pans. Now I'm going to cover those with a piece of plastic wrap that I've sprayed with cooking spray. And again, these need to raise until they're doubled in size, about an hour or so, and then they'll be ready to pop in the oven. So while those are raising again, we'll get going with the last dish of the day, which is going to be a green bean casserole. Okay, we're over at the stove to start our green bean casserole for the last dish of the day. And in my pan here, I've got 2 cups of frozen green beans. And just because I like to cook them this way, I have a little bacon grease and a little sugar in the pot, and I'm cooking these in some beef broth and some water, just enough to cover them. And we're going to cook those into about 10 minutes till they're kind of get tender. And then in my skillet, I've got 1/3 cup of butter, and we're going to let that melt, and then we're going to saute onions and mushrooms. And this gives the green bean casserole a little bit fresher taste than just, you know, dumping the can of mushroom soup in there. So it's quite a lot more flavorful than the traditional recipe. So give this one a try. My family really likes it, so I hope you'll try it for yours. This will take just a few minutes here for our butter to melt and our green beans to get cooking. Okay, our butter's melted, so I'm going to add in, this is 1/2 cup of chopped onion, and 1/2 cup of chopped fresh mushrooms. And the recipe doesn't really call for it, but I'm also going to squeeze in a clove of garlic here. Just because I like it, and I think it adds some additional flavor to our recipe. And it smells so good when it's cooking. And we're just going to cook these until your onion and your mushroom get tender. You don't have to cook them to death or anything, because this is going to go in the oven and bake some more. So, okay, I'm going to take our onions and mushrooms and garlic off the heat, and I'm just going to slide that back while we wait for our green beans to come to a boil and cook here. I didn't want to cook that to death. Those, like I said, it's going to be put in the oven for 30 minutes or so, so those will continue to soften up, and they'll continue to cook a little bit here in the skillet too. So our beans are about to come to a boil, so I'm going to check on the bread right quick while we're waiting for them. Okay, our beans have finished, so we're going to add those to the onions and mushrooms and garlic that we sauteed, and to that we're going to add the traditional can of cream of mushroom soup. And then I'm going to add just 1/4 teaspoon of Paula Deen's house seasoning, and that is just garlic powder and salt and pepper. Stir this up here. So I said earlier that sauteed onions and mushrooms, the fact that you sauteed those in butter, and they've got a nice fresh flavor. It's just so much more flavorful than just dumping in that can of cream of mushroom soup. So, okay, and then our final ingredient, I'm going to add just a dash of Worcestershire in here. And of course our French fried onions. I usually save just a few of those to kind of sprinkle on the top close to the end of the baking time. I love these. I could eat them just right out of the can. I think they're really good. Okay, so that's our casserole. I'm going to dump that into a baking dish. This is a pretty small recipe, but it's very easy to double. So if you're having, 6 or 8 or 10, just add a few more green beans and another can of soup and you're good to go. Okay, we've got that ready to go in the oven. Looks pretty tasty. Okay, we are going to finish up our chicken Kiev right now, and I have pounded out 6 chicken breasts. So I've got a chicken breast here that I've beat out with the meat hammer, and if you recall that butter that we put in the freezer a while ago, that goes right in the center of our chicken breast. And we're going to fold up the ends, and then we're going to roll this up. Or at least we're going to attempt to. Might be easier said than done. And getting the ends to stay in, I think, may be part of the trick. Kind of having to wrestle with it here. And then we're going to secure it with a toothpick, and it may take more than one, I'm thinking. Because the object is obviously to keep that butter in the center of the chicken breast so that it doesn't all cook out. These were very large chicken breasts, so I rolled that one up a little bit differently, but I don't think I'm going to have any more success on keeping the chicken in there, or the butter in there. These aren't going to be really beautiful, I don't think, but hopefully they'll taste really good. Okay. Now, we're going to dip our chicken in buttermilk. And then I have a plate that is breadcrumbs and fresh parsley and some paprika. So we're just going to coat those. And then I'm going to lay those in a greased 9x13 baking dish. Okay, it's time to put all of our dishes into the oven. So our chicken is going to go in at 425 for 35 to 40 minutes. As you can see, our bread has raised nicely, and it's going to go in the oven at 350 for about 20 minutes, along with our green bean casserole that we just stirred up. So we're going to be eating here before long, and while these are baking, we're going to put the finishing touches on our pumpkin pie. Okay, we're going to finish up our pie here, and we're just going to frost it with a little of this Cool Whip. And you can put on however much or however little that you want, or if you don't care for it, you don't have to put it on there at all. Now, if you want to get fancy and you have some Ready Whip, you can just make some little pretty things around the side here. Just some pieces of cookie that I cut in half. Just kind of decorate it a little bit here. And then we'll take a little bit of our caramel topping and just kind of drizzle that over the top. And the last thing we're going to add is just a few more of the chopped pecans. Okay, well that's going to finish up our pumpkin pie. Okay, our bread and our green bean casserole are out of the oven, so I'm just going to brush the tops of these with some butter. And you can see it's real fancy here, it's just the butter that's still in the package. But it does the trick. And you can see those baked up really nice and golden brown. And a lot of times I just lay my bread over on its side. That way it holds its shape really good and it doesn't fall. So I think those are lovely. So I'm ready to have some bread for lunch. Well, I guess that wraps it up for us today on our Company's Coming for Supper episode. So I hope you've enjoyed the recipes. The chicken's out of the oven and it smells really, really good. So I'm anxious to try that. And our green bean casserole looks tasty. And our pie. And of course our wonderful bread that I think looks wonderful too. So I hope you found a recipe or two here today that you'd like to try for your family, and we wish you a very blessed holiday season, and we hope you'll join us here again on Tammy's Kitchen. If you'd like any of today's recipes, you can email us at recipes@SheratonValley.com or check us out on Facebook. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you around the valley.